Hello, hello. Today we're going over lots of different information, research, all that sort of stuff for the fantasy playoffs and matchups, the schedule, lots to go over. So the first thing we'll go over is actually just injuries. There is so many injuries in the NFL now that it is week 14. Going into it, yeah, week 14. And we've had 13 weeks of play. Lots of guys have getting injured. Doesn't really show up on paper as much. So informing on all of that first, we're talking the differences between the first half and the second half for a little bit, going over the best teams against certain positions and the absolute worst teams, ones to watch out for, especially in those last 3 weeks. And then lastly, just going over the matchups as a whole for the playoffs, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, an update from a couple weeks ago, and we'll just do that in short. So first off today, gonna talk some injuries. For quarterbacks and wide receivers first, the defensive injuries that are going up against the quarterbacks and receivers for the rest of the season. What has changed that makes them a little bit better or a little bit worse than maybe what they are on paper? So that first one for quarterbacks and receivers, what's been affected is Indianapolis. They're losing Sauce Gardner at least for the rest of the regular season, it looks like, or at least the fantasy regular season. Most likely won't return until after that week 17 game. So moves them to more of that average defense to a below average, more so a positive matchup against the Colts. They've gotten a couple other guys back from injury, but still not the greatest against those receivers and quarterbacks. Washington, they go from horrible to last. They were already bottom five against quarterbacks, wide receivers. They lose their top two corners, and they've been abysmal in the last couple weeks without them. The Jets also don't have Sauce Gardner. They go from bad to worse, and Miami's entire secondary seems to be on IR this year. So even though they haven't been the worst against wide receivers or quarterbacks in fantasy, it more is matchup dependent on how that game is going. In terms of the EPA per dropback, they are 29th. So a lot of it's just game script dependent. Are people actually throwing on the Dolphins? Because when they are, it's working. Ones that the defenses get better, the matchups get harder. Denver, they're already good, but they're more that like fringe top 10 team this year compared to being number one. A lot of it because of the Surtain injury. So Surtain comes back. That matchup goes from not the greatest to really hard. New England, Christian Gonzalez, him coming back. They've gotten a lot better in the second half of the year, more so an average matchup at first, now below average, I would say. And then Chicago, way better. They not only get Kyler Gordon back, but they also get Jalen Johnson, outside corner, had the lowest target share allowed last season. So he's only played a couple games this year. Chicago's been beaten up in the passing game a lot, but going forward, I would expect them to actually not really be a positive matchup even, at least be average, but could be not even a good matchup in it overall. A couple run Ds that are getting a little bit better or are better now because of injuries coming back, players returning, or trades, that sort of thing. So DeForest Buckner, most likely going to return in week 15, which would be the start of the fantasy playoffs for the Indianapolis Colts, that star defensive tackle. He has been out the past month. So it'll be a little bit better than what they have been as of late with him in there. The other one is Dallas. They've been really bad this year against receiving running backs, but they've been bad, but not the worst against running backs on the ground. And then these last few weeks, Quinnen Williams trade, Overshown gets back, a couple other guys are healthier, and Dallas's run D is slowly getting better and better. These last 3 weeks, they've been really good against running backs. So it goes to more of that average matchup for fantasy running backs compared to what most people would be like, oh, it's the Cowboys. Incredible for fantasy running backs. It is for quarterbacks and receivers, but less so for running backs now. In terms of the defenses that are getting worse, the Jets lost Williams. They go from bad to worse on the ground. Buffalo has been horrible against rushing production. Bosa injury there could make it even worse. It's a hamstring. Most likely will be out this week. We don't know yet about the fantasy playoffs. San Francisco goes from more so average to below average. It's just been having so many injuries in general. Bosa, Williams, Fred Warner out. So they've been dealing with a ton already. Pittsburgh, they're going to be without Derek Harmon. He just got injured, so we'll see how that goes, but they're already kind of middle of the road. Milton Williams for New England. They were one of the best run Ds as of late. It's been more so average. Part of that is because he's been injured there. L'Jarius Sneed for Tennessee doesn't help, or that should be in the receivers. And then Green Bay, Devontae Wyatt. Could be a downgrade now there. Packers defense has been amazing. Wyatt, that defensive tackle that got hurt on Thanksgiving. Next, we're looking at the horrible matchups, the best defenses against running backs, and then the opposite, the incredible matchups, the defenses that have been really struggling against running backs for the fantasy playoffs in particular. So we're talking as of late, those injuries included, season long, have they been bad? Like what we should expect, adjusting to their schedule, all sorts of things. So it's a little bit subjective, but I've done a lot of the research on it. So the horrible matchups for running backs, the three that I'm most scared of, it would be the Los Angeles Rams defense, the Cleveland Browns defense, and the Houston Texans defense. So these are the teams that are playing against them. So the Rams, for example, Detroit, obviously you're still starting Gibbs, but Montgomery, not the greatest spot to be in. Seattle's running backs is really tough against the Rams in week 16, and then Bijan in week 17. Some interesting ones like Pittsburgh, they're more the fringe flex plays. Their fantasy championship against the Browns, the not greatest spot. And then we got teams like the Chargers in the championship against the Houston Texans with Hampton back, Vidal. Are they splitting in that committee? Who knows? The really bad defenses that we would love our fantasy running backs to play, specifically in that championship game, would be the Giants, the Bengals, and the Bills. So we got Derrick Henry again against that Bengals defense. It wasn't the greatest day, but he still had like over 15 fantasy points. Devon Achane against the Bengals, and then Trey Benson in that championship, hopefully, if he's coming back. Buffalo, their defense, they play against Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and Saquon Barkley. They are specifically really bad on the ground. They're actually great against receiving running backs, but that rushing production right now, they're bottom three. It's not really getting any better. So those three running backs, which a lot of them don't get too much in the receiving. Henderson does, but everybody else. And then the Giants. Commander's not really starting him, but Minnesota's not the greatest. But Giants in the championship at least gets the Giants. Sadly for us, the quarterback and wide receiver matchups, there is two that I would deem as incredible, dream spots, and then six that are horrible. Just looking at the secondaries, the Dallas and Washington secondaries, we love them in fantasy. They play against each other in week 17 of the fantasy championship. Incredible. Dream spots, like I would say, George Pickens, Lamb, or Dak in week 17, incredible. Commanders, they've been 32nd in EPA per dropback in the second half of the season. They lost their top two corners, like I was saying. And then Dallas defense, don't have to say too much. But if Daniels is back, that helps McLaurin a lot. In week 16, the Chargers and the Eagles benefit a bunch. And then week 15, if you need a prayer, the Vikings, the Giants, they'll be better than what they usually are for those wide receivers. And then quarterback two, Dart, set up pretty solid there. In terms of the bad matchups, the really good secondaries, there are six that I would deem as horrible spots. That is the Texans, Eagles, Chargers, Broncos, Bills, and Browns. Mahomes has to play them twice. This Chiefs offense gets the Chargers week 15 and week 17 against Denver. Doesn't help him a ton. It really hurts Xavier Worthy on the outside, I would say. Rice is more matchup independent in the slot, and a lot of his touches are manufactured. So he's never really going to be as affected. He's more just affected on is the defense stopping the Chiefs from scoring in general, which still, these defenses can do a little better than the average. Herbert in week 17 has the Texans. In week 15, the Chiefs are not a good matchup either. So it hurts them, even though that week 16 matchup is a dream spot. If I have him, I'm probably looking for a second quarterback for those week 15 and 17, either off waivers or trade deadlines don't exist in your league. Maybe get that second quarterback, especially with his injury and the other quarterbacks that are in these matchups, a slight downgrade for them just against these elite secondaries. These are two charts to answer the question, have teams been getting better or worse against the run and then the pass? The defenses specifically. So I compared the first half of the season's EPA per pass and per carry compared to the second half of the season. This isn't considering game script just because it's by play. But for example, Baltimore, they were 31st per carry as a defense to start the year. The second half of the season, they've been number one. They've been incredible, even as a defense as a whole. The Bengals put up 32 points. That was also because their offense turned it over 5 times. They still forced 6 field goals, so I wouldn't even say it was that bad of a game for the Ravens. But their run defense in the second half of the year has been number one in EPA per play. Miami, a lot better. They were 30th, if you remember. Hunting them in fantasy. They've been second best on a per play basis. So especially games where it's close and you're not just given a bunch of rushing volume against the Dolphins, their running defense has been good. Carolina getting a lot worse, 10th to 29th. The Jets without Williams, they've gone 12th to 26th now. Chicago getting worse. Tampa Bay was top 5. They're now 21st as of late, so they've been getting a lot worse. New Orleans, 23rd to 20th. So it went from amazing to, again, more average. And same with the Patriots, like I talked about with Milton Williams. They were seventh. Now they've been 17th in the second half. When we're talking about the pass, who has been getting a lot better against the opposing passing offenses? The Saints, they were 29th, and they are now 6th in the second half of the season. The Ravens, 28th to 10th. Even like with Burrow, again, like had a good day, but he also threw 50 times. Patriots, 21st to 3rd. They've been getting better. Shout out Gonzalez there again. The Seahawks, another one. They are now second best after being 17th. And the Browns, number one in the second half of the year as a passing defense. They were middle of the road before that. The defenses that are getting worse, the Vikings, they were top five, but as of late, they've been below average. Giants moving from 12th to 29th. That rushing defense is horrible, but that passing defense in the second half, also horrible. Commanders, 16th, middle of the road to start the season. Those injuries happened. They were getting worse. Now 32nd, second half of the year, like I was talking about earlier. And for those looking for a more updated fantasy playoff matchup list, this is a more simplified version, trying to take everything into account, though, and just giving them a simple score of that matchup being a 2, -2 for those horrible and elite matchups that I just went over. A lesser version of that would be -1 and 1, and then a neutral matchup would be a 0. So based on that scoring, looking at how they've been playing recently as a pass defense and a rush defense in the second half of the season, the injuries, players returning, all of that sort of stuff, looking more deep, and then giving it just a simple score of 1, 0, 2, -2, all that sort of stuff. So the faint yellow, those teams that are faint yellow in terms of the week 15, 16, and 17 matchups, that just means it's potentially a weather spot. It's not in the south where it's nice weather or in a dome, potentially some weather affecting since it is in December, and then that basic scoring system. One that is a lot different from 2 weeks ago would be Igbuka, more positive, because Mike Evans could be back. If he is by week 15, then that shadow by AJ Terrell probably wouldn't exist anymore. AJ Terrell would be split between Igbuka and Evans 50-50. So even though Evans comes back, Godwin's back, that might not be as good for Igbuka's volume. Better matchups because it's more split instead of everybody focusing on him. Similar in week 16 with JC Horn. Good for Jefferson, obviously still the number one technically in terms of the matchups, even though it hasn't been the greatest recently. You got some hope against Dallas and the Giants, and Detroit is more so that neutral matchup. And all these guys, Shakir still at the bottom. Two really hard matchups in week 15 or week 16 and in week 17. At quarterback, there's really one quarterback that is, usable. You want to play him and has good matchups, and that would be Jackson Dart, especially Washington in week 15. Then Minnesota, more middle of the road lately, and the Raiders in week 17, another good spot, especially for a Giants team. The Raiders can maybe score on the Giants, so it can be better game script. That secondary isn't great on a per play basis. It's not the greatest still for guys like Bo Nix, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, those guys at the bottom. Mahomes and Allen, obviously, you still play them if you have them, just, wish it was better, like we talked about earlier. And then at running back, this simplified version, Saquon, positive matchup every single week at least. It is a good matchup against the Raiders, Washington, and then Buffalo in terms of their run defense, which obviously matters the most for Barkley compared to his receiving. He's set up well for the fantasy playoffs. Hopefully, he can bounce back and make that draft pick worth it if you did take him in that round one and have kept him this long. Bucky Irving, also pretty solid. Miami has gotten a lot better. So the second half of the year, they've been way better, as we talked about earlier, one of the biggest risers in that run defense. So it's not the greatest matchup in the world anymore in terms of that fantasy championship. It doesn't look that way, but Atlanta's still good. Carolina's still good there. Another one, Kamara or Devin Neal. Positive matchups each time if you need a prayer in that flex. But some other guys like Judkins set up really well there. Benson early on, pretty bad, but those last 2 weeks, remember, amazing spots there. In terms of the negative ones, not the greatest for the Bears running backs, especially when we're talking just run defense alone. Browns, Packers, San Francisco isn't the greatest. James Cook, you still believe in him, like he's still a start. That Patriots defense a little bit worse now with the Milton Williams injury. The Browns have been number one in the second half of the year, so that doesn't really help. But the Eagles, again, in that fantasy championship, don't look as scary, especially as of late. So have them as a 0 with their numbers recently. But that's how it looks right now. If you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, if I did not rank your team in terms of their run defense or pass defense perfectly, feel free to let me know. I'm not going to get every single one of these teams with all 32 of them and knowing every single possible thing. So I try my best in terms of grading them in terms of a 2, 1, 0, -1, or -2. But there's one or two that are way off. Let me know. But thank you guys for watching. Have another video on Thursday, and I'll see you guys soon.